Hi, welcome to Planetary Calendar's Astro Portraits. I'm Lahni DeAmicis, one of the astrologers. We're going to look at the chart of James Knox Polk, at which point you're probably thinking, who? That's President Polk to you, the 11th president and the person responsible for making California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oregon and Washington State part of the United States, while legitimizing Texas actually being a state and not part of Mexico. He did this in 4 years because he said, as part of his campaign promise, he was only going to run for one term. He was going to serve one term and out. Drop the mic. That really rang a bell because as Joe Biden was making campaign promises for 2020, he said, I'm only going to run for one term. And then we're out of here. After his long service and his advanced age, that's not surprising. So I thought, let's look at these two people's charts. And there was fascinating things between the two of them. Both were lifelong politicians. Both got into the game very young. Both were attorneys. James Knox Polk had a law practice that he used basically to support his entry into politics. He was called Young Hickory because his mentor was Jackson, Old Hickory, President Jackson. Biden also had a number of important mentors as he was coming up. But from an astrological point of view, where are they connected? They're both born with the sun in Scorpio. Now, James Knox Polk was born November 2nd, 1795 in North Carolina. Biden was born November 20th, 1942 in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We have Biden's time, 8:30 a.m. We don't have Polk's time. Polk is born earlier in Scorpio, 10 degrees Scorpio. Biden's at 27 degrees Scorpio. It's interesting, Biden's actually in that part of Scorpio where you see a lot of connections to the Supreme Court. So he would probably make a very good Supreme Court justice. They both have Venus conjunct the Sun. This is something that imbues a person with a great deal of charm. They like people. They like being around people. They tend to be nice to look at. They smell nice. They like good food. When it's in Scorpio, as it is with both of them, it makes them kind of emotionally vulnerable. You wouldn't think so, but the Venus and Scorpio position is actually very emotionally vulnerable because they're willing to go to depth with a person. They're willing to get beyond the surface. It's an introvert position. It's called the detriment position, and it makes a person very accessible. Which, because they're so accessible, and because they're willing to go to great depths, the personality develops great depth. Now, Biden has Mars in Scorpio. It's a very, very powerful position. It gives him a strong presence. That's a rulership position, an extrovert position. Polk has Mars in Virgo. It's a very dutiful position. It's very detailed. He would work in the White House 12 hours a day. He barely left Washington in the 4 years he was in office. All of these incredible negotiations he did with Mexico, and with England because England had a claim on Washington and Oregon. All of that was done through writing and through people he had to work off to. The president right before him actually did things that started the Mexican-American War and he got stuck with the Mexican-American War, and yet he prosecuted the war and negotiated the treaties that basically filled out or unified the country from coast to coast while sitting in his office, working in his office in Washington, D.C., in the White House. Boy, is that Mars and Virgo. They like to stick to their desk, get their work done. Biden, with his Mars and Scorpio, likes to get out there around people. He also has his Mars, or his Mercury conjunct his Mars at 21 degrees. Actually, it's closer to his Sun. leading a sun. And so that's a very good position for an attorney and an advocate. Now, it's interesting, 21 degrees Scorpio, There's stars in that part of the sky that are known for brilliance. And the Mercury in Scorpio really is good at getting to the point. And it's funny that Joe Biden is not seen as a tremendously intelligent man. He's seen as a very likable man. But that Mercury in Scorpio at 21 degrees says, no, under the surface, this is a brilliant person. This is a deep thinker. This is someone who can strategize very effectively. And if you look back through his careers, he's been strategically a brilliant, brilliant man. Polk has Mercury in Sagittarius. He's a long thinker. He's thinking the long picture. This is why he could imagine, America as a unified country, even though he had never been to the West Coast, as far as I know, or been to Texas, he basically went from Tennessee, where he grew up. He was born in the Carolinas, but grew up in Tennessee, to Washington, D.C., and back and forth, and lived his life in a relatively close area. It's interestingly, he was very sick as a young boy, and they had to do surgery on him. And you see that in the Saturn in Gemini in the 6th house. 6th house is health, Gemini is youth, Saturn is difficulties. And after that, he was healthy toward much of his life. Joe Biden in the 6th house has his moon in Taurus. He's not quite a full moon position, but his moon and sun are opposite each other by sign. Moon in Taurus is a very, very strong position. It's the exalted position in the 6th house. And his conjunct is part of fortune. The man's as strong as a bull. That's how you describe it. This is a man who just has solid, solid health through most of his life. It's interesting, the things he's had, I think, has been like little skin issues, skin cancers. That's moon in Taurus. Taurus is the skin, Venus. And it goes back to that Venus and Scorpio conjunct his sun. So it's very, very energized. What's interesting is that we don't know the time for Polk, but when we look at his photos, when we look at his career, I would guess Capricorn rising. And the reason is oftentimes Capricorn rising people have problems when they're young with their health, but as they get older, they become healthier and healthier. And that really describes Polk. Also, when you look at him, you can see the Scorpio in his chart. You can see the Virgo in his chart. You can even see the moon in Cancer in his chart. But there's something else there with the high cheekbones and the structure and stuff that really looks like Capricorn rising, which coincidentally would be about noontime, which would talk about a person who was out in the public sphere. Joe Biden was born right after dawn, Sagittarius rising. That's his optimism. The Sag rising is so obvious in him, and it's controlled by the Jupiter. Where's the Jupiter? The Jupiters are in Cancer, the exalted position. This is very cool because it shows where this great optimism and this great caring nature comes from. It's in the 8th house, though, the house of handling resources collectively. The 8th house is the Senate. This man was practically born to be in the Senate or born to be in politics. And that goes back, it connects it to the moon in Taurus, also the exalted position. So the Jupiter and the moon are both in exalted positions. It shows this guy is like the best friend of everybody, because that's what the exalted position means. It's the best friend, it's the colleague. And it really connects the two together. With James Knox, his moon was in Cancer. We think so. Well, his moon's in rulership. It's probably in his 7th house. He was in a devoted relationship with his wife. I believe her name was Teresa. His whole life. It was just a great love story. The last words he said as he was dying was declaring his love for her forever. So his partnership with her, it was part of the mainstay of his life. It was his emotional foundation. It's one of the things that made him so strong as a person. It allowed him to stay on course. His Jupiter, was interesting, is in the 2nd house in Aquarius. And this is funny because his money did not come to him through politics. I mean, he made his money as a politician, but his main money came to him as a grower. He inherited property, plantations, he was from the South, from his father. And that's basically what he lived on, even though he rarely ever lived there. And he basically had people, overseers, run the property. And this was during the slave era. So he owned slaves, but he was very disassociated from it. He was very careful to not bring that issue up He didn't let people know if he had to buy slaves. He kept this away. He said, this is a private matter, because he realized he was balancing between, the anti-slavery movement of the North and the pro-slavery movement of the South. And in fact, he's actually blamed in part for, as they expanded west, for not blocking slavery from the West. And that this later created part of the division that led to the Civil War. The reality is he had 4 campaign promises, and he pretty much accomplished all of them. And the unification of the country was his primary one. So I don't know if he would have been able to accomplish that if he had brought that issue up as well. After all, there were presidents after him before Lincoln. So it's really a fascinating view of these two men. Politicians they oftentimes feel when they get in the presidency, they need 8 years to accomplish their task. And here these two men, both Scorpio, laser focused. Joe Biden's big goal is to unify the country, but on an emotional level. Now, it's interesting that his sun is in the 12th house, which is the end of life. His sun, it's a stellium. The sun, Mercury, Mars, and Venus in the 12th house, showing that he would have a great deal of effectiveness in the later part of his life. Well, yeah, he's not a young man. What's interesting is that the Sun and Venus, all this group, which goes from 12 degrees to 28 degrees, is in what's called the Gogolon spot above the ascendant, which is where all the power is. Even though it's in a different sign from the rising, it carries a huge amount of power in the 12th house, a huge amount of leverage in the 12th house, which is the area that's seen as government, that of the common good. So, 2 fascinating men, 2 fascinating charts. It's interesting how things repeat. So, come visit us on Tuesdays for our new portraits. Come visit us on Fridays for our weekly forecasts. You visit planetarycalendar.com and spaceandtime.com to buy your calendars, because your planners, because you want to know what's going on in this uncertain world. And thanks for joining us. Be well.